Amen. Good morning, church. It is. Thank you. Somebody yelled it out there. I loved it. Whoever that is, I love you. Great job. Thank you very much. I get the best messages. We're going through a series on life's biggest questions, and I've actually enjoyed it. I hope you've enjoyed it. We're trying to answer all the questions that get put against the church for 100 different reasons. But I found, it's interesting, though. I found that there aren't a ton of questions. It's a manageable amount. But I get the fun one today. And so today I get to answer sort of a big question. And the question basically is, why is the church judgmental? It's all of a sudden very quiet in the room. Exactly, and that's kind of the way I felt about it when I learned I had to do it. Why is the church judgmental? First of all, before we even approach the question, the church itself is based on a series of right and wrong, do's and don'ts, some would say, but we believe there is a right and there's wrong. It's based on truth. In culture, there are those who don't believe there is any standard to truth. So whenever there is a truth, it diametrically opposes itself to something. So an example would be, we believe women should be treated with respect and not beaten. But if you were to take that into another culture where it is acceptable, the church would be diametrically opposed to the culture. Truth sets itself against culture oftentimes, yes. It sets itself against homes and families. So when you start to look at why is the church judgmental, part of the reason is that, by itself, if you choose to believe there is truth, you will put yourself in opposition to something. But when people say, why is the church judgmental, I want to share with you what I'm not going to talk about, because I could have spent weeks on this conversation. What I'm not talking about is the soccer ump or referee out there who chooses what's the right call and the wrong call. I'm not talking about the judge in the court who chooses whether you've stolen that money or not stolen that money. Particularly, I want to share with you three perspectives, one of which I believe is truly the church. But the other two, which have been promoted as such, I'm sad to say. The first one is, I want to take a look at the church judgmental. When people say the church is judgmental, typically they mean one of these things: intolerant, condemning, always forming a negative opinion about others, self-righteous, legalistic, mean-spirited, unloving, harsh, judgmental. Always condemning people. The legalist. You got to do this, do this, do this. Now, I'm going to have some fun with this, okay? How many of you have ever met a Christian that you would say is judgmental? Raise your hands. There we go. Vast majority. Welcome to my world. Isn't that wonderful? Anyways. But then when you look at culture also bears upon that decision as well, because culture that we're in right now is pretty much given to pluralism and humanism. A pluralist believes that a diversity of views or stands rather than a single approach or method have to consist together. That is to say that you not only accept a different view, you believe the other view, which redefines the word tolerance, because that's not what tolerance means. But you see it on bumper stickers sometimes, when people have a bumper sticker that says coexist. Also, the humanist believes in a system of thought attaching prime importance to human rather than divine or supernatural matters. That is to say that life's answers will all be found inside of you. You are the answer to life. It will be found inside of us, collective humans. The problem is, as I was studying this, it's fascinating, and you could do this yourself if you'd like. Just go online and study what a pluralist believes a pluralist is and a humanist believes a humanist is, and you will leave the conversation thoroughly confused. Which represents well sort of the polarization of our culture. Because as people say Christians are judgmental, would you say there are any trolls on the internet who are judgmental? Would you say that culture itself has been polarized into judgmental groups? We go out of our way to find the fascinatingly extreme, ugly whatever and elevate it to some sort of platform of authority. But the church has been judgmental. The church is guilty of being too condemning at times. However, we must have good judgment because we believe there is truth. There is right and there is wrong. Paul dealt with this in the church in Corinth. And particularly, he dealt with an issue in which there was actually incest being committed within the church. And he writes this: "It is actually reported that there's sexual immorality among you, and it's of a kind that even the pagans do not tolerate. Even people in the culture wouldn't accept what you're doing. What business is it of mine to judge those outside the church? If someone's outside the community called church, because the church is solely a community of people, what business is it for us to judge that? But are you not to judge those inside? God will judge those outside. If there's that kind of a sinner in your church, expel them from among you. If any of you has a dispute with another, do you dare to take it before the ungodly for judgment instead of before the Lord's people? Why would Christians sue one another? Right? It's a terrible state of affairs when we cannot judge rightly within our own home. And I love that, by the way, with our church, is that we have dealt with a lot of stuff through the years. Never had to go to court for it. So Paul's telling us that there really is sort of this inside and outside thing we need to look at. So in a church that's judgmental, let's take a look at that. When you look at the inside of a church that's judgmental, you see a church that's intolerant, it's mean, it's unkind, it's harsh, it's legalistic, it's filled with nothing but rich do's and don'ts or processes. You got to do this, you got to do that. Many people have been hurt by those Christians. What else is interesting about a church, and I want you to understand that, is because the church is a community of people, people that come into a church and say, yeah, I go to church there, sometimes they're not even Christians. And then other times when they come into the church, they come in broken. We're in the saving business, so they come in with a lot of damage. And the thing about that, folks, is that you might meet them, and they're judgmental, but you know what? They're kind of new to their faith. They don't really understand Christ yet. Also, you have to realize, outside of the church as well as inside the church, people have what's called personalities and propensities. And there is an interesting group of people out there that basically, they're pretty much judgmental about everything. So when they come to a church, they just sort of bring it with them. You know? Jesus is just an excuse to be more judgmental about something. They like the idea that's right and that is wrong, and because that's wrong, you shouldn't do it, and I'm going to tell you not to do it. And I will use the words like it's justice for my inconsiderate, uncompassionate heart. Inside the church, we've created a lot of damage from judgmental churches. But how does that affect outside? You see, outside the walls of the church, if the church is judgmental, it will try to impose its belief system. It'll try to legislate morality. We had one experiment of the judgmental church that sort of failed, but it was born out of a good heart, you'd think, right? Remember Prohibition? Anybody? Prohibition. You know, the church saw a lot of families being destroyed by alcoholism. You ever seen a family destroyed by alcoholism? And isn't your gut just sort of like, we just need to ban that stuff because it's killing people? Well, the church sort of did that. And it imposed legislation into the culture called prohibition. Prohibition then became a big issue because, you know what, the biblical perspective wasn't that you can't drink, it's you shouldn't get drunk. So they took it to this extreme of you shouldn't even drink. They prohibited it. alcohol. And out of that was born some ugly stuff. The culture hid it underneath. The mobs, gangsters, all sorts of chaos because of it. Let's just say it was a failed experiment in judgmental behavior. Prohibition. You see, the church judgmental forgets that we are created in the image of God, and it shows no compassion for those who are in need of salvation. Instead, it seeks to impose its views on others with intolerance towards their behavior. That's the church judgmental. But there's another church that's sort of the opposite of that one. This one I call the church uncritical. This church pretty much takes everything and says we can accept anything. In fact, these are the words you might associate with this church. Accepting, lacking discrimination. Believe it or not, synonyms to uncritical are simple and naive. The libertine that uses religious freedom for sins. And people would say they're unjust. And our culture feeds into this idea of do whatever you'd like. Why? Because two of the principles our culture is built in are hedonism and materialism. Hedonism believes one's personal pleasure is the greatest good that you'll ever have in life. Just pursue whatever you like. The other one, materialism, believes that wealth provides all your happiness. If you just had more money, you'd be happy. And we like, at this point in our culture too, we like redefining words. We're redefining words like freedom and tolerance to mean what we want them to mean. You see, the church uncritical is basically just acknowledging the culture that's uncritical and bringing it into its community. Well, Richard Dawkins is a well-renowned atheist, and I think he puts sort of the bottom line pretty well for his reference point of morality. He said, the universe we observe has precisely the properties we should expect if there is, at bottom, no design, no purpose, no evil, no good, nothing but blind, pitiless indifference. I'm not a big fan, but the cold, harsh universe, that's what you get to be a part of. Well, the church isn't uncritical either. In fact, we've had to deal with that. In Jude, there was a situation that arose where certain individuals whose condemnation was written about long ago secretly slipped in among the church community. They're ungodly people who pervert the grace of our God, the idea that He loves you so much, He gives you unmerited favor, unconditional love. But they perverted that idea into a license for immorality, a license to get away with whatever and deny Jesus Christ even as the only sovereign Lord. You see, this church uncritical has two effects that aren't good for the church. Inside, and now I'm going to speak to leaders, not just people in the church. I want to speak to the leaders of the church. Inside the church, you have adultery. Have you ever heard of a pastor committing adultery? You have thievery and greed. Have you ever heard of a pastor taking money from a church? Pedophilia. Have you ever heard of a pastor with children? These gross immoralities should not be. They disgust God, and they're hidden under a perverted sense of grace on the inside. You see, if you're the church judgmental, the world will criticize you. If you're the church uncritical, the world will criticize you. I hope you're getting the theme here. The church, when it's done right, will still be criticized by the world. But this should never happen. There should never be inside the church the leaders like this. It's unacceptable. It's grotesque. In the life of our church, we've had 3 men whose wives ran off with pastors that we have had to heal here in our community. That is unacceptable. I thank God that for 10 years we have had no serious leadership issues, and it's because the leaders in this church actively protect and deal with issues in the church. Because a church has to heal brokenness when it comes through that door, but we don't know who's coming through that door. A thief, a pedophile, we don't know what walks through that door, but we deal with it. When a church is uncritical, it then goes outside the walls and it starts to accept cultural norms. And outside the walls, it starts to accept whatever is going on. And that's part of the problem that happened in the church in Germany in World War II. Did you realize in World War II, the churches band with the government to support the Aryan race? Dietrich Bonhoeffer and several others had to fight back against it at the cost of their lives. But the church became biased, prejudiced, bigoted, racist under Hitler's regime. And think of all the things that happened under that. And you know that's outside. That's what an uncritical thinking will do, to acknowledge and accept whatever is going on out there. The church uncritical loses sight that we're created in the image of God. And we should live just and loving lives. Instead, it gives the allowance for sin in the church. I love Micah 6:8 because it really sort of defines God's heart on this. It says, He's shown you, O mortal, what's good. What does the Lord require of you? But to act justly and to love mercy and to walk humbly. So if the church should not be uncritical and it shouldn't be judgmental in a condemning way, what then should the church be? The church should be the church merciful. The world should know the church as an institution of mercy and salvation. They should associate us with compassion, tolerance, kindness, gentleness. Leniency is a tolerant and mild disposition. Do you have a tolerant, mild disposition? Forbearance, forgiving, loving. Let me throw up some others. If you're doing this, you can also be correcting, rebuking, disciplining. But you better make sure you have the mercy first. To have the heart of Christ in this. You see, James deals with this as well. He says that speak and act as those who are going to be judged by the law that gives freedom. Not Old Testament, this law that gives freedom under Christ, because judgment without mercy will be shown to anyone who has not been what? Merciful. Mercy triumphs over what? Blessed are the merciful, for they will receive mercy. This church, from the inside and the outside, will be defined by Christ. On the inside, it will be the saved being saved, the sinners finding salvation, the broken being restored, the unforgiving finding forgiveness. Jesus will be loved first, not second to culture. It'll be a saving, restoring, loving, encouraging, forgiving, correcting place. This is the church, merciful. You won't read about it in the newspaper. You won't see it on your Instagram because the world hates it. But outside the church, outside. Yes, outside. You do realize abolition, the abolishment of slavery, would not have occurred without the church pressing in on the issue. The church drove abolition. Do you regret it? Freedom. Most of the tenets and the foundations of our culture were based on Christian or Judeo-Christian ethics. These tenets that you were raised in, I was raised in, these freedoms that we've been given didn't come arbitrarily from nowhere. They were ideals of Christ and the church. we should be seeking justice and mercy. In fact, we should let our light shine in such a way that people would see our good deeds and not glorify you, but God in heaven. That people would see our good deeds and say, he's a part of a church, a merciful church. The church merciful realizes that we are created in the image of God and that we've fallen into sin and we are made redeemable through Christ. Our mercy shows the unconditional love and grace needed for the healing and restoration of people's lives, expressing itself through gentleness, tolerance, not acceptance, and love. This is truly the image of the church. I would like to say there are more churches this way, more leaders this way, more pastors this way. It is a hard thing to do. It is constantly challenged by those who would want you more judgmental or more lenient. But the image of the church really ultimately is seen in the image of Jesus in every person's life in this room that chooses to follow Jesus Christ. It's in our community, and it's reflecting the kingdom of heaven. This is what the kingdom of heaven should look like. And in our love, it's reflecting the grace and salvation offered to everyone through Jesus Christ. Corrie ten Boom, I have always loved that woman. What a godly saint. She went through so much in life. She had a great way of separating these three worlds. She said this: if you look solely at the world, you're going to get distressed. And if you look within, you'll be depressed. But if you look at God, you'll be at rest. Blessed are the merciful, for they will be shown mercy. I am here to ask forgiveness, representing any leadership in any church that ever let you down because they were too judgmental or too uncritical. If you have been hurt or damaged by the church, I represent that in leadership, and I would humbly ask your forgiveness. It is unacceptable to Christ to have churches out there that do these things. But I would also call on you by God's great mercy and ask for you to seek to be merciful. It is one of life's biggest decisions to stop being judgmental or uncritical, to actually care. If you were hurt and you need help, let us know. If you're hurt and you want to heal, let us know. If you need to know Jesus because you want to know a merciful God that loves you and shows you grace and unconditional love, write that down on this in your bulletin. Write it down, put it in the offering box. We'll follow up with you. But when you look at this church and you say they're so judgmental, realize we live in a world that right now, especially, if you don't believe the world's judgmental, just go on social media. Good grief. We don't need more judgmentalism, and we don't need leniency, not leniency, but the uncritical spirit of letting anything go. We need merciful churches with lenient hearts and strong correction, to stand up for truth, to live it out in community. We have combated many things in the life of this community and this church, and I will gladly tell you, we have healed some incredibly hard situations. We've done some incredible work, and it's been Christ in us, and it's been the mercy of God that's done it. We have been able to heal those broken hearts of those who have been victimized, and the victim is healed. How about the victimizer? Well, we've been able to help them too. Because you see, Jesus saves people who have hurt others and those who have been hurt. He saves everybody. But we must learn to become merciful, because at the end of this life, I pray you're able to say, I have been blessed because I have shown mercy. And those who have shown mercy will be shown mercy. Life's big question. Maybe it should be, are you as merciful as you should be? Let's pray. Father, thank you so much that in this world there are so many polar opposites pressing and pulling. There's so much ugly press to the church, to culture, in every area. Father, help us to be ambassadors of mercy. And if someone here has been hurt, that they might find healing. They might be restored to be messengers of mercy into their own lives, their families, their communities. And I pray that you would use us as a church to continue to love the unlovely, to love those who have been hurt, love them hard enough and long enough to restore them into love. Father, there is so much pain in the world caused by so much suffering. There are too many Epsteins and Weinsteins. Too much junk. May it never be said of your church. And may your church always be merciful. In your name, amen. Please stand with us as we sing.